Welcome to Section 5 on Data and Database Fundamentals. Here are the different topics that we're going to be covering in this section. The first thing we're going to understand is the value of data and why it's so important. Whether you're a massive organization, a smaller business, or a startup, or just one person, you have data that's valuable to you. That data needs to be protected, safeguarded, and ensured that it doesn't get leaked out or that people who shouldn't have access to it can access it. Next, we'll be talking about databases and database concepts and structures. The different types of database concepts ensure that our data remains safe, it remains structured, and it remains accessible. The database structures are how we actually achieve that. So these are all of the different types of structures that we can use in databases that house our data. Lastly, we're going to be talking about backup concepts. These are our backups for our data. If anything ever goes wrong, if there's an error in a database or in our data, if someone hacks into our database and destroys things, or even if someone accidentally edits, we need backups in order to ensure our data remains safe and accessible in the event of any sort of calamity. Now, those are the topics that we're going to be covering all throughout this section. Let's understand a little bit more about data and databases in general. So data is any information that can be used for a wide variety of reasons. Databases use that data or data in general to organize it and structure it in a way that it can be more easily stored, managed, and accessed. Database fundamentals explain the basic ideas and the basic concepts of how our data is stored, organized, and how customers, users, or employees actually interact with that data. Here's what we're going to be covering in regards to the basics of data and databases. First, we have the value of data, why organizations collect data, what a database is, what database availability is, and how we can ensure that data remains accessible and remains up. Then we're going to be talking about data to information to decisions and how data plays a role in the information that we use and then the decisions that we make in our personal lives as well as in our business lives. Next up is data analytics, which is the analysis or the study of data. Then we're going to be talking about big data, which is a concept especially in larger corporations. Then we're going to be talking about data monetization, so how people actually profit from using data. Lastly, we're going to be talking about critical as well as non-critical data. Let's talk about why data is valuable. Data is valuable because it can store anything from our addresses, health information, numbers, text, records, or anything that you can think of. Data can store it in a database. Data is valuable because it can be analyzed to make decisions, improve operations, support businesses, and data really allows us to have information about some certain subject or some certain area. So overall, in larger organizations, data helps support decisions and planning, improve services and productivity by constantly analyzing data in order to see where improvements can be made. It can also have financial, business, or personal value. Lastly, it could require security and protection. For example, with health information, we need to make sure that if we're in an organization that must abide by HIPAA, that we're protecting our patients' information in terms of their health information. But there's so many different laws and regulations and different types of policies that are out there that are intended to protect data in specific areas. For example, in financial institutions, they have to abide by certain financial institution laws regarding data. Same thing with healthcare. In the United States, HIPAA is a mandatory regulation that healthcare companies must follow in order to protect patient data. There are so many different types of laws and regulations, and if you're interested in learning a little bit more about them, you can check out some of our courses on GRC or governance, risk, and compliance, where we talk about many of these laws and regulations in far more depth. But this is a little bit about what data is. It can be anything as far as giving some sort of information, and usually data is stored in databases. Next up, let's talk about why organizations actually collect data. So organizations collect data to understand their operations, their customers, their employees, their environment, their products, their services, whatever an organization has, more than likely, they're collecting data of some sort on that. This also helps with decision making, planning, and business success, because the more you're able to iterate through understanding data, the more you're able to actually keep growing and keep applying things to improve future success. So some more main reasons here that companies collect data: to record activities and transactions. For example, if you were sending out invoices, that would be a form of recording activities. You're recording your transactions, what you're charging clients for, what you're invoicing for. Same thing with legal and compliance requirements. Many times, again, like we were talking about previously, because of legal, compliance, regulatory requirements, sometimes we have to collect certain pieces of data and sometimes we have to protect certain pieces of data. Next up is monitoring systems and performance. From an IT perspective or cybersecurity or any sort of technology perspective, we can use data in order to help us understand how systems are performing. So for example, with servers, we can collect data to see exactly how they're performing and any areas that we might need to tweak or even scale back. Finally, we have a reporting and documentation here at the bottom. And these two use cases are using data to actually create some sort of reports to give out, to send out to provide high-level overviews, or for documentation, for example, how-to steps or steps that show exactly how to do things. So we talked about data, but what is a database? A database is an organized collection of data that's stored electronically. It allows data to be very easily stored, searched, updated, and managed as long as you have access to that database. So here's why databases are important. Databases can hold a lot of information in one place. Users, employees, or anyone who has access to that database can also easily find, update, and retrieve information when needed. Data is also structured in order to reduce errors and duplicates. So we can set databases up with specific filters, specific rules, and we can structure our data through our databases. Finally, most databases include some sort of security features nowadays. Database security is incredibly important if you're working with data that would be harmful if it got leaked out. So many times when we have what's known as a database administrator, many organizations will hire on an employee to solely focus on managing databases, securing them, and ensuring that data doesn't get in the hands of the wrong people and that the data remains available as well as the data doesn't get unnecessarily altered. So that job would usually fall on a database administrator or something like a SQL administrator within an organization. That is a real job nowadays. Now, how much AI will take over that job, we don't quite know yet, but that has been a real job in the past for database administration. Next up is database availability, and this refers to how accessible a database is when users, employees, or systems actually need to use it. Most databases have an extremely high uptime or availability. A highly available database ensures that data can be accessed with little or no downtime. Most databases are set up to where they're available as much as they can possibly be available for. So for example, a database might be available for 24/7 with a 99.99% uptime, meaning the time that it's down is very, very rare, and it's usually addressed very quickly if the database does go down. So databases are important because anyone who needs to use the database, even if not directly, if they're using some sort of data associated with that database, needs to be able to use it, and they need a high uptime for it. Think about it if you ran a clothing website online. Now, you might think the customer doesn't really interact with the database, but that's wrong. Let's say that you had a database that stored all of your inventory. If that database went down, customers who are shopping on your website wouldn't be able to shop. Your website might show out of stock, or it might allow them to actually purchase things that aren't available. So it would cause a lot of headache, and overall, customers, employees, users, anyone who interacts with some of your business services or the data or databases directly are going to be impacted by database availability. If a database is unavailable, again, services can be impacted no matter what type of business is being ran. Many applications nowadays depend on databases to function properly. So again, just because we're not necessarily going into a database and viewing it from, say, the SQL perspective doesn't mean that we're not interacting with it. Here's an example: a customer using a banking app to check their financial information. If the database associated with that banking application and that financial information data goes down, has an error, or is otherwise impacted, customers will not be able to check their financial information. So you can start to see databases are not just a data issue or an IT issue or a security issue or a database administrator issue. Databases can affect everyone within an organization. They can impact customers. They can really do a lot of damage if they're not properly available and secure. So keep all this in mind. Following that, we have data-driven decision making. So data moves to information, which then moves to decisions. This is an example of how we use data-driven decision making, or essentially how we use data to make decisions. This form of decision making shows how raw data is turned into useful information that helps us make better decisions. So data is raw facts such as numbers, sales records, or user activity. We can then take all of that data, maybe hundreds of thousands or millions of pieces of data, and turn that into reports or information because we've actually organized and analyzed the data. Once we've gone through, we've sorted the data, we've analyzed it, and we've understood it from a macro perspective, meaning we've understood what the data is saying at large, then we can start to make decisions. In fact, this is how most high-level people within an organization make decisions. They have some sort of data to back it, whether it's the CEO, the CFO, the CIO, many different people who rank highly in a company, even in the C-suite, or especially in the C-suite, will use data in order to get information and in order to make decisions that either drive company growth or drive company decline. So keep that in mind. Data analytics is the actual process of examining our data, using it, and drawing some sort of pattern, trend, insight, or higher level overview of what that data actually means. Data analytics or data analysis essentially helps us turn raw data into useful information. So we just talked about the decision-making process using data. We take data, we turn it into usable information, and then we make decisions. That's what data analytics analytics is. It's the information part. It's helping to take that data and turn it into usable information. So data analytics analyzes data for valuable informations. It identifies patterns, problems, and areas for improvement. It reduces errors and guesswork, and it also can help to take emotion out of the picture a little bit. Many times when we're working in a business or a corporate environment, people have a hunch or an emotional feeling or a guess, but data helps us make sure that we're making our decisions not based off of emotion or gut feeling, but that we're actually making decisions based off of what we can prove and what we can show. Data analytics or data analysis also helps organizations understand customers and general performance of multiple different factors and areas of a business. Big data is a massive part of data in general. So big data refers to very large and complex sets of data that require special tools in order to analyze and find useful patterns and insights. So what big data essentially lets us do is it helps us as organizations understand where customers and behaviors are and where they occur when properly analyzed. So we can understand why customers do things, why they demonstrate specific behaviors, why they tend to click this specific image versus this specific image, especially with things like advertising, with things like social media. Big data is incredibly important. Following that is supporting decision making and making connections based on real world data. Lastly, big data can be used to improve products and services. And one example I want to show you here, or I want to explain to you, is big data is very, very commonly used nowadays in social media. So for example, when you're scrolling through TikTok or Instagram or Facebook or even Reddit, whatever you're scrolling through, these applications or these programs or these websites, they're actually monitoring everything you do. They're noting, okay, this person spent 4 seconds looking at this picture, but they just scrolled right past this one. Or this person watched this video for the full 8 seconds of the clip, but after 2 seconds, they scrolled past this one. That's where big data is really, really prevalent in today's world, is in social media in order to get people hooked. If you've heard of the algorithm, that's an example of companies gathering data or using big data in order to continue to change the way that you see the platform. So big data, it's not as relevant if you're just one person or you're running a small business normally, but big data in larger organizations is where things start to get extremely important to understand, because big data makes a lot of business decisions even without human input. So keep in mind, big data, an individual person doesn't really have a use for big data. Same thing with smaller businesses, but larger size businesses, they use big data all the time. Data monetization is another concept where we can use data in order to make money or create business value. Companies use and sell data in order to improve products, attract customers, increase revenue, advertise. They also use data for cold calling to reach out to you, trying to sell you things. So overall, data is not necessarily just used ethically within companies, it's also sold and traded to other companies. So your data, if you've ever input something on a website, for example, if you've been using the internet for the past 5, 10, 15, 20 years, your data has been sold. So essentially companies will go through these unethical ways of taking your data, collecting it, and then selling it to other companies for them to use however you want. So just keep in mind, your data probably is out there in some capacity, and data monetization is just any use of data in order to make money or to create some sort of business value. And it's not always ethical. Critical and non-critical data. So data can be grouped based on how important it is to a system or an organization or customer or a person. Critical data is essential for a business, operations, product, services, or person, and its loss or its leak can cause immediate or long-term problems. So keep that in mind. It's not just losing the data or the data becoming corrupted, it's also the data being potentially leaked out to the wrong person or accessed by the wrong party. Non-critical data, on the other hand, it's helpful, it's useful, but it's not essential. And normally it doesn't cause a major impact if it's lost, and it can be easily replaced. Here we have a chart showing critical and non-critical data. So critical data, it's essential for business, operations, products, services. If it's lost, it can cause major disruption or system failures or major business disasters. Security needs for critical data, it requires strong security and regular backups. We'll talk more about backups in future videos. And some examples of critical data include financial records, important customer data, and system files. Non-critical data is useful, but again, it's not essential. We don't need it. Impact if non-critical data is lost is it could cause little to no serious impact. Now, it might be time consuming, it might be tedious to get the information recreated or however we can get the information back or back up, but usually it's not a major deal. Security needs for non-critical data, it usually doesn't require much security. You can implement lower levels of security and it's really not that much of a security concern. Finally, with non-critical data, you can think of non-critical data as being something like being in old reports that might be public now, temporary files that you just really don't need, test data and information that you really just don't have a huge use case for. So overall, we covered a lot about data. Let's recap what we've learned. So data is a valuable asset that's used to support decisions and operations. Data can be almost anything. We've talked all about data examples. Organizations collect data to analyze trends or do data analysis, improve services, increase efficiency, and more. Databases store and manage data for easy access and reliability. Database availability is an aspect of databases. It focuses on how accessible our information is and how good of an uptime that we have for that information. Data becomes useful through the process of transforming data, so actually taking the data, analyzing it, turning it into usable information, and then making decisions based off of that. Big data is mainly used by much, much larger companies. Remember our social media example. Big data handles large, fast, and varied data sets, and it's the handling and actual use of massive amounts of data. Data monetization is turning data into either money to sell data or to use data in some sort of way, or to create some sort of business value. For example, using data to constantly improve your services. Another example of this would be the car making company Toyota. They often collect a wide variety of different amounts of data regarding people's complaints, regarding things that need to be improved. That way, they're constantly improving, creating more business value, and they're addressing people's problems. Even with this Toyota example, Toyota is using an example of data monetization. While they're not necessarily directly profiting by selling data, they do benefit from collecting that data and using it in order to improve future products, or in this case, future cars. Lastly, critical data and non-critical data. Critical data must be protected. It's vital to businesses or to people, and non-critical data is just not that important. It has much of a lower risk, and it's not that crucial if it gets lost, damaged, or stolen. So overall, we've covered a lot about data. Just keep in mind, data and databases are the backbone of how many companies operate today. If data gets lost, if databases don't function properly, it can have huge business impacts on an organization.